Welcome everybody, this is Stephen Boyton from CDW Canada. I'm the Solutions Manager here and I want to welcome you to the CDW Canada SimCity Webinar. Our second in our ongoing topics around security awareness and actions you can take to adopt a secure posture. A few housekeeping items just before we get started with the introductions and the webinar itself. As you noted when you joined the conference, it is in lecture mode and we'll keep it that way up until the very end. Please, if you have questions, you'll note in the bottom corner of your WebEx session, there is a questions and answer box. Please feel free to type in and submit your questions there. We'll go through them and try to pull out some of the more interesting ones to address at the end of the presentation. Today we are hearing from Adam Zimmerman, one of our security solutions architects here at CDW Canada. With his many years of industry experience researching and developing exploits, his master's in IT security focusing on malware classification, as well as simultaneously serving as an officer in the Canadian Armed Forces Reserves, he brings a unique skill set and experience set to the security practice. I hope you enjoyed and gain a better understanding on security information and event management and how the proper application of a SIEM appliance or tool can give you the visibility and information beyond just the data that you actually need. With that, Adam.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction and thank you for everyone for joining. Just to give a little insight into the name SimCity, if everyone remembers that game from the 90s, it's basically you're operating in a town, in a city, and so much is happening it's almost impossible to mitigate. Well, much like having a solution like a SIEM helps you manage chaos. And with that, let's look at some of the topics we're going to be discussing. So we're going to review a slide actually from the previous presentation, then we're going to get into it. So the previous topic was holistic security. So SIEM is one of the 9 layers that I identified as being critical to a security infrastructure. And then we're going to get into talking about the different vendors, look at the Magic Quadrant from Gartner, and just go into a lot of the questions and comments we've been getting from our customers. So to start it off, this is that lovely wheel from the previous presentation. And as you can see, SIEM is highlighted. It's actually further along the development life cycle of a cybersecurity strategy, but through our customers, they wanted to hear about SIEM, so we decided to bump this one up as a priority. So again, it's not necessarily in order, but this is 2 of 10 presentations, and hopefully we'll see you all on those to come. A little side note is I'm going to talk about in the next slide that SIEMs are very valuable to any level of a security organization, and I personally deployed one in just over a day and a half. It was a pretty shoddy implementation because it didn't have much time, but it was an essential piece of the next exercise I'm going to be discussing. So some background into that is in early December, I was in the UK taking part in a NATO cyber warfare interoperability exercise. And it was a simulation on a country versus country cyber war, essentially like Armageddon daily. So the bombardment of risks and threats occurring every minute for 2 total weeks was quite an interesting experience, and the only thing that I can 100% say that was incredibly valuable was understanding risk management at the highest level, having a tiered security approach and a response framework. So one of the first action items I had for our team was we needed a SIEM. We needed to see attacks coming in. We needed to at least have a piece of operational intelligence that we can make executive level decisions on. And in some cases, we were controlling, if you see some of the networks that are there, out of those 5, there was a weaponized UAV net, there was classified materials, there were power controllers for cities. It was very, very substantial. So to not have a level of visibility would have been frightening in trying to defend against attacks we probably wouldn't see otherwise. So it was pretty quick. It was a day and a half deployment of a SIEM. Cost wasn't an issue, so I used whatever I wanted. In this case, it was Splunk, and we'll talk about that more later. It wasn't really just a preferencing, it was the first one that came to mind, and they happened to be in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. So The risk management summits that are coming up, which I'll talk about in one of the later slides, will have a lot of material on this specific exercise that I went on. You'll see and hear some insights as to what the industry is doing at vastly different levels than what we would see on a daily basis. So, SIEM. What does it stand for? Oftentimes I still sit across from customers and I ask, I say, do you have a SIEM? Do you plan for that? Can we look at a security framework and build a roadmap for SIEM? Like, that should be a kind of 1 to 3 year plan. If you don't have one, you should be planning. And oftentimes they come back, it's like, oh, I've heard the term. What does it mean? Well, security information and event management, I personally kind of only am concerned about the security piece. Obviously, it's used for a lot more than just that. Not just members of a security team would manage a SIEM, but they would definitely be one of the larger influencing pieces, because knowing what to do in an attack means you have a lot of intelligence on what is actually occurring and why it's occurring. So that's what a SIEM does. It correlates logs. It gives you a ton of available information that you may not have had otherwise. It lets you see what you don't see on a daily basis. So those points there, like the user accountability, the machine data, threat correlation, these are highlights, right? These are functionalities that are built in to next-gen SIEMs, which we'll get to in the next slide, the Magic Quadrant, that really help in a tiered approach, right? Security, small or large organizations, regardless, require to have cybersecurity. It's a piece. It's an entity. It's required for the years to come. Just with vulnerabilities of technology alone, you need someone to manage it, right? User behavioral analytics is that third one, UBA. So that's a pretty important one, because I want to understand, for instance, internally, what users are doing. Is it attack behavior? Am I going to be vulnerable based on what my users are performing on a daily basis? Who knows? Well, the SIEM knows. Right? It's about alleviating risk from human error potential. Right? If you have somebody staring at raw logs all day long versus smart tech that can provide that level of automation, that's something that I would want to integrate in a long-term security strategy. And then further along down, we'll see custom reports. So one of the favorite expressions I like to use is executives love pie charts, but not just executives, even technical people like myself and people on the call. Sometimes data visualization speaks volumes, right? Just having too much pictorial representation of data is obviously not good, but having the right amount so you can properly say, hey, look, these are our threats, look at this pie chart, and then look at this pie chart in 6 months from now. There should be a difference. You should see trends going down in terms of there's greater visibility versus actual incidents occurring. You should see a decline in open tickets versus your SLA and responding to them. There is functional data visualization you can pull from a SIEM. And again, the ultimate goal is to understand your infrastructure, right? Know what you don't know and build plans to improve your overall security awareness, both internal and external. So let's look at the Magic Quadrant for SIEM. So if anybody doesn't know what the Magic Quadrant is, so Gartner develops these unbiased, agnostic leaderboards, essentially, of all vendors of different types of technologies. And what we are concerned with for today, and I'll mention some others, but are the leads in the space. Why is this important? Well, technically everyone on this list deserves to be on this list, right? There are a lot more products that have not made it onto here. There's a lot more vendors that hopefully will get on here next year or move from the niche players category all the way up to the leaders, and I'll mention a few in a moment. But the big thing to understand is, so IBM, for instance, is QRadar, Splunk is Splunk, and LogRhythm is from TELUS. The important thing to pinpoint here is these vendors and these products have earned their place in the top leaders' perspective, so it's only fair we discuss them. Again, doesn't really matter who or what solution you end up going with. It's more how you plan to utilize the technology and which one fits with you. So, understanding the threat landscape. This is taken from the previous presentation I did on holistic security. It still appears to be a large gap with a lot of our customers. I talk about this all the time. So the CSE is our Canadian equivalent of the NSA, and they have top 10 lists that they publish every year. One being security controls, what you should be doing, how you should be minimalizing your attack surface, right? Or in what you see at the bottom there, shrink your attack surface. So those 4 gaps are still the largest, I would say, in most organizations that I come face to face with. So network access control is a big piece. Is there user accountability? Is there governance? Is anybody actually keeping track of what users are performing on a daily basis? How much pivot potential vulnerabilities exist? Meaning, do you have a lot of network shares that in most cases don't need to have certain access rights, or some users only need read access versus write? You're limiting the potential for a compromised endpoint to write, to make malicious changes to files in this particular example. These are things that you might want to look at. Software vulnerability is a huge one. Patch management, right? Building in vulnerability assessment platforms so you can understand as you grow as an organization where potentially you are most vulnerable just because your patch cycles are weak, right? If you're not patching at least at a quarterly level, then there's a problem there, right? So if we look at some instances of early 2018 already with Meltdown and Spectre, these are huge vulnerabilities that oftentimes, well, I can't really say oftentimes because there's almost no easy comparison for an akin vulnerability, but firmware updates were the big solution there, the resolution process there. So if you haven't already patched critical infrastructure with those updates from those respective vendors, there's a problem. It means you're still vulnerable to something that can honestly cripple your organization. So it's not to be a fear factor here, but that is a huge part of maintaining a security infrastructure, is understanding how patch management fits into the overall objective. Network segmentation and zoning, this is big. This prevents breaches. Well, it prevents the spread of breaches. So if I am able to get onto your internal environment because, for instance, you don't have anything beyond default credentials of a network printer and I'm able to connect to it from your DMZ, it's kind of bad, right? So it means now I have a weak device, a smart device that stores data on what has actually been printed, private confidential information. I would want to see some reports on this. I would want to pull, specifically talking about printers and scanners, I would want to pull that data, right? Because I would want to create stronger boundaries around these susceptible technologies, and that directly meets with that zoning requirement. And it's not just for the top CSE controls. For those on the call that have a PCI compliant organization, network segmentation and zoning is a huge piece of PCI DSS. So it's more than just for SIEM, it's more than just for security, it's also for compliance. And it's there for a reason, right? And then lastly, user access control. So I want to, this almost is akin to network access control. I want to hold users accountable for their actions in some way, shape, or form. If users are doing things because we allow it, in terms of we have loose firewall rules and we allow users to stream, sure, that's fine. You know, we've already established we're going to let them stream their shows on their lunch. But where are these servers hosted? Right? They're not hosted in North America because we have copyright and IP laws here, and our cyber law doesn't allow that sort of access because it's technically illegal. So where these servers are hosted are in other bad regions of the world where malware command and control servers are hosted. So if we allow constant up and down streams to these regions, what are the chances that someone will hijack a link, or just a bot will hijack a link and start uploading malicious content to that user and then use their rights in order to create more potential risk in the organization? It's not unheard of. It happens all the time. But again, I want logs of this activity. I want to know which user is patient zero in a breach so we can identify how it occurred and then work backwards, how we can strengthen our external resolve to prevent future incidents. So this all boils into visibility. What can you see, right? You'll see those controls are on this list. These are the common pieces that get fed into a SIEM. Right? Are you situationally aware? Do you have logs for all of the following items here? The ones at the bottom, the starred, are for more security proactive organizations. It doesn't mean they're not for you. Currently, it means you have to build towards it. Once you've mastered the top 7 items, then we can talk about the bottom 3. And by mastered, I mean you have a reporting system that works. You have a tiered approach to your SIEM. So for smaller organizations that may only have one security person versus larger who can have 5 to 10 or more, obviously priorities are going to be different here. But a big piece is understanding how much information is too much information to be piping into a SIEM. From day one, all of these 10 items, probably not a good idea, because now we're talking about a burden of too much information. Even though it's all important, imagine what your consoles will look like if you turn on a SIEM, a self-learning SIEM, and it starts to pump all of this data to you. You'll have no idea how to manage it, right? It's too much, right? It's going to detract from the ability that a SIEM can provide. You want to properly choose the logs that go in, and some of you have asked questions, and we'll get to that. I'll go a little more in depth. So short answer is it's a stepping stone process. You don't want to upload too much data, but the too much data is a sliding scale. It's nothing that I can really tell you as this is the exact value of how much data is too much. It's a case-by-case basis that I can help you identify, but there's no one golden answer. So let's look at some consoles and dashboards of the Gartner leads. This is what I was talking about early on. So this is QRadar. This is from IBM. So this is what the main page looks like. These are just snapshots. Anyone could go grab them. I was going to load up a console, but just from network activity would probably be a bad idea. So I just took some screen grabs, and some of these are what you can find online. Anyways, an important thing to note, and I'll use the laser pointer here, is what I do like about this console is that you can load RSS feeds and news, right? And people might say, well, doesn't that detract from the attention span of the analyst that will actually be reviewing this? And no, it actually would add value, right? You might see cyber attacks that have been posted here. You might see incidents that are occurring around the world. And then you should actually start using that information to go look through your own log activity. You say, oh, okay, I'm going to say click on one of these links, and there might be an IP to a region that was responsible for an outage, aka an attack on someone else. So I might want to look for that specific IP or look for different country tags and filter my own log data based on what's happening in the industry. It's actually very important. So I like that. And a lot of the SIEMs that I'm going to show you are customizable, and you can do that regardless, but it's nice that by default that actually appears, right? And obviously here's some advisories. So these would be like CVEs. There would also be content on just what's occurring with your own platform. So for instance, like QRadar, Splunk, LogRhythm, they'll have some threat intelligence information from all the other deployments. It's obviously sanitized. They're not sharing information on internal environments, but they're sharing information as to what attacks are happening or what reconnaissance, for instance, events are occurring across the platform. It's somewhat important, right? Because, again, you don't want too much, but you don't want too little. And this is another important piece right here, vulnerability count. This is something I would always want to see in a SIEM. I want to know where my top potential weaknesses are. So right here you can see there's IPs listed at the bottom, and they're obviously matching color codes to the bar graph right up top. Again, data visualization. It's important because I want to see where my biggest avenues of risk are. So if I have something, what would be nice actually if there was an association by risk category, which I don't believe there is to date, but again, it's not something that you can't go digging for. So just to sum up, I like the dashboard. Could be a little more user-friendly, and we'll get into the log activity now. So this is what the generic security analyst would be performing. So a tier 1 would be performing. They'd be looking obviously at logs, not raw logs, because that's for people without SIEMs. They'd be looking at something like this, a dashboard where you can see events by count. You can have obviously colors associated. This is where, again, data visualization counts. But then if I were to click on one, like this is obviously an image, so I can't. This one is cross-site scripting. I would click on that, and the events down here would change, and it would show me the events correlating to that color, which in my mind is somewhat valuable. It just expedites the process. So if I know, for instance, a breach has occurred, and one of them, for instance, is a cross-site scripting event, I can already filter to that. I don't have to search, right? That's another piece I'll put in the negative category, is to apply filters manually. You'd have to, click add filter. You'd have to customize. You'd have to learn some syntax, which isn't a huge detriment overall, but oftentimes each suite will have their own level of syntax that you more or less have to learn and become proficient with. So that's maybe a mark in the negative column. But other than that, great SIM, lots of great functionality, and we'll pop them now on into Splunk, or in this case, the Mint dashboard. So Splunk is one of the newer SIMs. It's gained a ton of credibility in the space, often because it's branded the most like Google. It's actually very easy to use. In my stint in the UK, this is the SIM of choice that I picked only because I knew that the rest of the team that I was on, the Blue Cell, their level of technical competence wasn't necessarily meeting mine, so I had to choose a product that I knew I can kind of just train them really quickly in a day to understand and properly report risk. So that's really why this one kind of won over the rest. Just to give a nice snippet here, you can see data visualization at the top. I like that. You can see there's the titles are a little different. You can customize this as well. But again, what I do like is that this dashboard isn't just, we'll call it security, the S part of the SIM, but there's a lot of operational pieces here. Right? Active users is important because if all of a sudden I see a user drop off, but then I see a lot of failed login attempts, a different type of log, I'd want to know that. I'd want to say, okay, this is suspicious. So it's nice that, and again, all of this is customizable, but oftentimes a default instance of these SIMs will load the most traditionally deployed dashboard segments. Another piece to talk about here is, so crash rate, this is obviously, well, can be a security incident, but in this case, it's part of the event management piece. So it's something that's nice to see. I like the user friendliness and just visual representation of this. This is why it's somewhat easy to use. Plus, when you're searching for things, which is our next slide, you don't actually need to know the syntax to search. You can type in, much like the Google browser, which is why everyone says it's like Google. You can type in what you want to see, and it'll correct your syntax in the search bar. So it'll more or less train you on how to properly search for things. But the value is that it doesn't require excess knowledge to learn from the get-go. So again, these are events by timeline, much like all SIMs, or at least the next-gen options have. And if you click on one, it then changes the log events down below, and you can delve deeper into a potential incident, right? So very important, very valuable. I like the search functionality. Splunk also has, I think they call it their Splunk base, so you can download hundreds of thousands of apps for all the different types of technologies that you have, and it ports over the logs for those via their Splunk collectors. Let's talk about LogRhythm now. So I kind of, just from the onset, this looks the most, we'll call it cyber-like. The blacks, the whites, kind of looks cool. But SIMs shouldn't just look cool, they should be functional. So just from the onset here, I do like some of the data visualization, but from the onset, you'll have to really choose. There are so many options for LogRhythm versus the rest. And by options, I mean all of these little panes here that you can upload. There's almost too many. It's hard to standardize the main dashboard. So say, for instance, I have a security team, a network, and a systems team. They all have user accounts that I give them, and they can all pop in and look at events. All the security analysts, for instance, will have different dashboards. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but depending on their tier, depending on their level, I would want to standardize an image. And it's very hard because it's not like you can save a template. You have to individually load them. So that I would say would be a knock in the negative category. But in the positive, I do like, again, some functionality. The dashboard, this one looks kind of messy, but it can be clean. I just picked this one just to talk about pros and cons. The one thing I do like, though, and this is now, so alarms in this case would be alerts, same type of, same information. So you can see, it's obviously a timeline of events up top, but I do like the one-click to investigation piece right here. So these are events that are grouped, and I can click on one. So for instance, there's 45 risks identified in each one. I guess it seems to be a magical number here. But I can click on that and it'll open up a list for all of that. So I don't have to actually search anything. I don't have to search anything yet. Let's be clear. You do have to search. You do have to filter results. But if I customize, for instance, what each of these 6 risk categories are, I will just see everything grouped here. I'll see a number, and based on that, I might want to investigate. So I do really like that. That's great. Although, again, so if I want to search, I'd have to create different cases, and there's no real like search functionality. Besides, yes, you click up here, but then it'll load another window, and some of the negative categories I've heard is just lag. It's just system lag, especially with cloud deployments. But that can happen anywhere. It's system availability and resources. So maybe not everyone experiences the same level of lag, but anyways, all in all, great solution. It's earned its spot for a top candidate. Now I'm going to talk about a few honorable mentions that some of our customers have and also ask about. So SolarWinds, there's a big one. It was in the Magic Quadrant image. It was more in the niche category, in the lower end of the niche category, but it's still there. So we're going to talk about it for a little bit, for a few minutes here. So as you can see, this is just an image. A lot of compartmentalized data here. It's actually a thing I don't like, and you'll see in the next slide. There's almost too much data that's being presented and not enough actionable information. So I want to not just see pictures, but I also want to perhaps see logs. I want to see some functionality. Yes, you can click and drag these around. You can move them around. You can resize them. But from the onset, the default templates, I wouldn't say are that great. You really have to, read the content, which obviously isn't a bad thing, but for ease of deployment, I'm not huge on this. But in general, it's great for log management. From a security piece, I can say it's definitely not as good as the leaders and even some in the niche space. So like the FireEyes, the Fortinets, the Alien Vaults. It's not, I would say, as security centric. And here's another image you can see where, again, compartmentalized data. It's almost too much. I would look at this and I would probably close half of them just because I don't want to see this. I would rather see logs mixed in with data. And another thing I don't like is you have to scroll in these boxes. Again, it's the burden of too much data being presented to you. You have a lot to do from a security piece. This, to me, is something that, again, requires too much of an inspection and not enough actionable information. But at least they give you options to put a lot of panels here. So I guess you can fit an additional 2 here instead of this long graph. So another honorable mention that recently changed their SIEM is Fortinet, so the FortiSIEM. So this is, you can actually, when you're using FortiSIEM, you could load the old console, which looks a lot like QRadar, or you could use their new one, which is this. So I do actually really like this GUI versus the last, and traditionally I'm not a GUI person. I actually really like the technical, messy look versus the clean look. Just for me, I'm more of a raw log type person. But anyways, the value here is, again, you can customize all this. So this actually kind of looks a little bit like the SolarWinds display, except there's actually information mixed in with their visual representations. In fact, you can't have one without the other. So I kind of like that they make you stick to a hybrid of both. You can't just have a picture, and to me, you should never just have a picture with a SIEM. There needs to be words associated and content associated with the data visualization piece, or else what's the point, right? And you'll see in the next slide another feature that I actually really like from FortiSIEM. So this is their devices by risk. This is incidents. So this is something that I wish the others will incorporate, and LogRhythm actually somewhat has, but it's a little easier to sort, right? So I would like to click on risk categories here, and in this actual screen grab, there are no high or medium, which is interesting, but this was actually a really fresh install. And what I do like is, say I want to click on this risk category, it'll bring me up every single incident in the exact same risk. Or I could click on the device and just look at the device. These are actually 2 separate panes here. So yes, it looks like one, but everything is individual. So I can either search by device or I can search by risk. And I don't have to type anything yet. Again, I don't want to have to learn syntax if it'll slow my ability to investigate. I can add filters here, I can search. The functionality, is great, but I wouldn't say it's as easy as Splunk, but it's more akin to the QRadar and LogRhythm perspective, where you do kind of need to learn a syntax in order to search, or you can set up dashboards like this where you can just click and it'll give you the log data, which is what I would actually prefer when I'm training other people in lower tiers of a security organization. It's a lot easier for them to just click. So this is a big piece that I get a lot, is how should I deploy a SIEM? How do you do it correctly? Well, we're going to talk about the wrong first, and then we're going to talk about the right after. So the do's and don'ts. So number one for wrong, and you might think that's counterintuitive, but the take my money approach. I need a SIEM because my board told me I needed one, and we need a check in the box. So here you go, figure it out. Tell us what to buy and we'll just pop it in. Sure, I can do that for you. I wouldn't advise that because I want to build a security roadmap. I want you to develop a framework. We want to build a strong, you hear these buzzwords like security fabric. Well, how can you do that if you are just getting checks in a box and that is all? Well, you can't. You're just having technologies that nobody is managing. This is actually more in the negative column, as if you're doing this to your organization, you're plaguing the potential team eventually that will have to manage all of this data. So what you should actually be doing is understand the reasons for the technology. It's right there, right? It's there for a reason. Why are you deploying a SIEM beyond I need this because the industry says I need this / my VP, CEO, CISO told me I needed this? It's being used for a reason, right? And the big reason is operational intelligence. I want to see things. I want to understand what's happening in the organization. Another big wrong in terms of what isn't being performed is due diligence, right? You can reach out to CDW. We can do that for you, but it should be somewhat of a two-way street, is you should be involved in the process, right? I'm not the one who's going to be managing your SIEM for you. Me personally, I'm not going to be doing it. I can advise you along the way and help you with your team in terms of this is how the process and procedures should work. This is how it will be integrated into your organization, but it will fall onto badged employees, hopefully, or it'll fall to a third party that will manage it for you. But someone internally to your organization will need to actually use the consoles, will need to use the technology, right? So do POCs. See, let's get some demos for you. That's the next one. Refusal of demonstrations. A lot of our customers say, no, you know what, I don't want a demo, just pick one for me. And it boils into the previous point where, again, I'm not the one managing it. I will have a different point of view for you because I've used all the three that we talked about. The Gartner Magic Quadrant, I've deployed all three instances of those SIEMs for vastly different companies that I've worked for in a tier 3 role, doing the advanced exploitation and threat mitigation pieces. So I have a different insight as to what I would use. Obviously, it comes down to preference, but another piece is do demos, right? Actually play around with consoles. See which ones you like, which ones you don't like. And now this is a big one. This is what we're going to actually talk about in the next slide. / a lot of you had questions around this, is what should I pipe into the SIEM? So the wrong method is, like I showed that giant list early on, is too many logs, right? You're piping too much in from net zero, from the first day. You're going to have too much information. It's going to be very hard to get a grasp as to what's happening internally, right? Start small, then add to the count, add to the pile, right? Just pipe in what you absolutely need. For instance, like perimeter and endpoint devices. I would hope that when I'm seeing incoming traffic at my most edge devices, I see similar traffic, if not almost identical at the endpoint level. Meaning, if I'm seeing, for instance, SNMP traffic, so mail traffic, come in, and it's going to a specific user, if it never actually makes it there, and for instance there's an encrypted payload, I would kind of want to be alerted to that because it means that perhaps there's some encapsulation and obfuscation occurring, and it's not actually an email. It could just be using the port and to just slip malicious payloads through the firewall, which is a lot of fun, and we can get into that another time. But that is something that I would want to see. So I would prioritize data based on what I know will be potential risks, and what I know is industry best practice. right? Edge, so perimeter, and endpoints. Those are really your top picks, specifically not just endpoints, but the ones that leave the office, right? So not just the desktops, the laptops. I would want a local agent running on all of my endpoints, because when one of my users goes to a coffee shop or goes home and doesn't necessarily VPN into the environment, I still want accountability as to what's happening on that machine. I want logs collected. It's very important. So that's definitely a huge talking point and comes up in every single SIEM conversation I have. And the last bit I'll talk about in the wrong category is the set it and forget it approach, right? This isn't something you turn on and walk away from. This isn't something you choose to not manage, right? It's funny because the M stands for what, and too bad the volume is off for everyone, but that's the management piece, right? So the set it and forget it approach is incorrect. This is something that you want to build into a critical operation piece of your organization. You want somebody managing this. You want this to be the highlight of their day. You want them to pull all the actual information you need from the SIEM. And ultimately, if you look at the right column, you want to build this into your incident response framework, right? You want to become proactive with advanced technologies like a SIEM. This will get you there. So utilize the technology. Don't just, again, deploy it for the sake of that purpose. You're deploying a technology for a goal, to reach an objective. The objective is to be proactive, to have that enhanced capability, and that is what we are trying to achieve at the end of the day, right? Then there's obviously the maintenance of a SIEM and selecting the right vendor, which we're going to briefly talk about. So much like in any product, when you're evaluating multiple vendors, they all say, we are the best. We all do this better than the rest. But, there's maybe some truth to that. Yes, everyone has a secret sauce, in quotes there. If we look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant, those three were the best last year, 2017, right? They can't say solely they are better than their competition, because then you would only see one vendor in that top quadrant. They're all there for a reason. They've earned their spot. It's because for user accessibility, for generalized ease of use, for technical competence, they have earned their position there. Obviously, there are some that aren't on that list that we did talk about that might actually be up there this upcoming year based on what I've seen and based on what I'm hearing just from our customers and just the industry itself. It means that it really comes down to the technology versus the name on the box, right? So I'm a vendor agnostic resource, although we did talk about some key vendors. We can help you pick the right one. And often I recommend the big piece here is research, understanding why it is you're deploying a SIEM. Security reviews. So this is more aligned with gap and audits, gap analysis and audits. So the SIEM can be used, obviously, by your security team, as it should, but it should help identify policy and procedural issues as well, right? If you are seeing a lot of incidents occurring, and it's because you have weak firewall rules, well, there's a gap identified right there. If you're seeing that there's a lot of utilization at certain times and excessive bandwidth use, then that actually would still go into a security audit, but it would also help you at the operational perspective become more efficient with your employee base. So again, this technology aids in identifying things you may have not actually seen. And then the deployment life cycle, right? People say start to finish. How long will a SIEM take to deploy? Great question. The answer you might not like. It varies, right? It's not like IAS was able to deploy one in a day and a half. Was it as good as a SIEM as if I had 2 months to deploy? No, absolutely not. But it gave me a piece of insight that I would have missed otherwise. I wouldn't have known how attacks were happening. And in that specific example, we were given a fresh network we had never touched, worked with people we have never met in our lives before. In some cases, some language barriers. Luckily, code is obviously based in one language, but still, it was difficult to understand what we were trying to achieve. A SIEM helped us actually map and perform some reconnaissance efforts in our own environment. I was seeing attacks coming in, touching resources that I hadn't actually mapped yet. So I was able to perform almost like a dual form of reconnaissance using SIEM as a method of network mapping. So that was actually kind of interesting. But again, short answer, it depends on the engagement. Obviously, you want to achieve something within a quarter, so within 3 months, so you can have proof of concept for the next quarter and then potentially an ROI strategy for the third, and then another development review in the last quarter. So I would say that aim for a quarter, but aim small, miss small. So you want to choose a life cycle that'll actually work with your ability to achieve the deployment in a correct manner. So you don't want to rush this, but you don't want it to take too long, or else you won't see the added value quick enough. So some more to follow pieces. This is actually what I'm really excited about in general. So we do develop a lot of content at our customers' request, mostly being our security blog, which I do write. So customers will send often like the questions you have, asking what they want to see, what perhaps they want the next topic to be, information on what's happening in the industry. So I haven't posted it yet, but I developed a quick one-pager on Meltdown Inspector. I develop a lot of content around, for instance, like phishing emails, war driving, cyber weapons, things that our customers are often just curious about and want a point of view on the matter. So that's something that I develop, and there will be more series to come. There are 2 full series up there, and it's something that I'm passionate about. It's really an educational piece. It allows me to bring our overall technical awareness at the customer base a lot higher than it is right now. And again, ask questions, ask for content, and I'll deliver the content. Another big piece to talk about is we have some managing risk summits coming up. This is what I was talking about before, the cyber warfare exercise that I took part in. I will be discussing that as it pertains to identifying, qualifying, and managing risk. So obviously you need to properly qualify risk in order to actually identify a number and how it fits into your organization. And ultimately this will aid in your incident response, business continuity, and disaster recovery planning. But it's a very, very important topic that oftentimes gets left out in terms of the industry is seeing that this actual risk management piece is being left behind. More so because a lot of companies quickly just say, you know what, I'm going to accept the risk, and we're going to add to our risk tolerance matrix. We're just going to keep accepting some risk because it's easier to do, and it doesn't cost money. But ultimately, one of those risks can cost you a lot. If we look to the industry, some major breaches, obviously in those cases, too much risk was accepted, and we all saw the shortfalls of that. So, and then lastly, we are still working on building our lab, but what I plan on doing with that is having a space that we can show our customers what we're actually working on, the research that I conduct, which a lot of times pertains to one of my favorite topics is malware. So not just research and development, but reverse engineering of some samples. So we're partnered with a lot of vendors that collect a lot of malware, right? Not just for hashing purposes to load into their threat intelligence pieces, but to build on a national database or a worldwide database. So I have access to some cutting edge samples that I do like to reverse engineer and help to pick out some indications of compromise that might actually aid our customers in the long run. And then this also boils down to cyber weapons. So I do like to do a lot of research into worms, because we all have seen the damage of Stuxnet, one of the worst catastrophic worms created that destroyed a nuclear facility, caused billions of dollars of damage within 3 days. Very, very serious stuff, but again, a nice, interesting research piece that we would be happy to show off to our customers when we get to that point. And it's not just me. I'm not going to be the only one in the lab. We have our full team of solution architects in their various branches that will also be in the lab doing work, showing customers the value we can bring. Now we're going to...
Well, thank you very much, Adam. I think it's fantastic being able to see and hear the discussion around the SIEM and how it actually can help us develop the risk landscape, as you were saying. Really being able to aggregate the data and make it into information about your network, your user access control, about the application errors and behavior analytics that come along with it, the top 7 and bottom 3, as you say. Layering the learning that the SIEM implementation can actually provide to us, making sure that it's at a manageable level for our teams, being instrumental in actually guiding us around the cybersecurity strategy circle that you showed us at the beginning. I think it's been a fantastic discussion also on some of your assessments and comments of the SIEMs that are available, whether they're up in the top of the Magic Quadrant of the Gartner Quadrant or not. So certainly as we gather some of the questions here, I think it's very apropos to look at how the implementation, and I know you touched on the ones that are in the Magic Quadrant, but certainly a lot of our partners are in the rest of the quadrants, and each of those, based on your abilities, the staff you have, and what you're really trying to accomplish with your SIM, are absolutely viable selections for partners and SIMs to implement. So we just have a couple questions here that came in. Let me look through the first one here. Adam, do you recommend on-site staff to look at SIM, or is it the task too overwhelming for more small IT departments?
That's a great question. So this is something that actually I hear a lot, and our customers look for guidance, and that's really why we're here. So in my professional opinion, it's always great to have a badged employee responsible for something like this. This isn't just a technology, again, to set and forget. It's something you want to manage and integrate, right? This is one of those security fabric pieces. It's vital to response time. Your security response oftentimes is directly correlated with your ability to see events. So yes, third parties do a great job, right? That's why they're there. That's why it's a great industry piece for advanced understanding and capabilities. But having somebody that is responsible for that on a day-to-day is really the best practice that can be achieved. That is something that if I were inheriting a security organization, I would want to be able to turn to someone, go into a SOC somewhere and say, show me the state of affairs. I want to see what is happening right now. I wouldn't want to have to call someone. I wouldn't want to have to receive an email or report. I would want someone with the ability to show me what is happening. So that's not just at the tier 1 level, that should be at an executive level. So that is my response to that question. Great question, though. Thank you for whoever submitted that.
Great, yes, thanks for that, Adam. Just going to look at this one, and it's a little bit long. We rejigged some of the words here, so just trying to get it properly organized. They're asking a comment on the extent to which automation is typically being attached to a SIM implementation. I think they're looking at events that are logged in the SIM being automated and triggered to alerts and/or ways of finding out how to take action.
Sure. So loaded question. Great question, though. So a beautiful feature of a lot of our next-gen SIMs. So as we saw as the Gartner leads, I'll call them next-gen SIMs because they are pretty cutting-edge technology. They have a lot of automation built in, and what this means is by default, you can load the instance, you can load a lot of the collectors, and it'll just automatically start sorting events on its own. It'll perform that environmental learning experience. So it doesn't require a lot of configuration and functionality from the onset by a manual user. It'll perform this intuitive piece on its own. So that is a prime example of a learning capability, enhancing your ability to ultimately not have to sit there and manually tune an instance. It is required. It is a piece that's required with SIM, ultimately, is the tuning, much like any technology. But the second piece that I'd like to add to that, so not that I don't like the automation, I do, it's very valuable, but another piece is the understanding, again, of implementation is I will want to see logs, for instance, come in from my firewalls. I will want to examine that and say, how can I strengthen my rules based on what I'm seeing? I used to see raw logs, now I'm seeing digested logs. So the automation helps you, obviously, depict what's actually happening from a raw perspective, but I would want to use this functionality to, again, enhance my overall resolve, as I would want to utilize the automation to support a manual process. So it's not just one or the other, it should be a hybrid.
Excellent. All right, I think that certainly makes a lot of sense. Another one certainly is on a lot of people's minds as everything goes to the cloud, and we keep hearing about cloud. And frankly, I think CDW Canada with our cloud plan certainly have the ability to help you organize and understand which way you're going. But the question that's coming into us here for this venue is cloud versus on-premises SIM solution a better option?
Great question. It does come up a lot, and again, I would say that there's no golden answer. a lot of people don't like hearing that, but I'll give you an example for why. So
Great.
for smaller organizations, which a lot of questions do come in, is I don't have the people to manage this. How am I going to do that? It's very expensive to bring an on-prem box, and also where do I put it? How does it logically and physically sit in my building? It's things that they just don't want to be concerned with. So for those organizations, say sure, a cloud deployment will work for you. But for the larger organizations, now we're looking at the leaders in the space, like banks, telecommunication companies, military, law enforcement, weapons defense companies, those with a little more skin in the game where a breach is not an option. They will traditionally always stick to an on-prem solution for this specific instance because it just gives them more control, right? The more you push off into the cloud, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing because there are some workflows that should be in the cloud that you shouldn't be managing for just operational capabilities. That makes sense to push some of these things to the cloud, but for those large organizations that want more control, that want physical accountability for their own technology, on-prem should be the avenue for them.
Excellent. You're absolutely right. It is somewhat confusing, and our ability to figure out what needs to go onto the cloud and what needs to stay is vital and going to continue to be a large question that we have. And I know our guys that are dealing with our cloud plan service here at CDW Canada can certainly take you through all those steps. I think we have time for one last one here. The question really is coming in, and I think it's a fairly popular one. I've seen a lot of variations on it here, is that we need a SIEM product. We don't want to spend too much time managing it. Any recommendations? Interesting that it is managed though.
Sure. So yes, this does again come in a fair amount, is how to select the right vendor. And as I was talking before, there in this case isn't a golden answer. There is not one. So if we again look to the Gartner leads, there's not one in the leader category. There's three. Well, there's more than the three, but those are the top three, right? They're there because they've earned a spot. So how do I agnostically say this one is better than that? And I can't, because that's not how my answer would be given. It would be based on your requirements, based on not just budget, but your ability to manage. This solution makes the most sense. And let's build a plan around this. So I won't just say, here you go, choose this SIEM. You're going to deploy this SIEM, so in 1 to 2 years from now, you're going to have a threat intelligence piece and perhaps a threat prediction and threat hunting capability by deploying these solutions. This is how it all fits into your plan. It's not, again, about just buying something. It's about integrating it into a long-term process. So my answer to this would be, yes, you don't have to perform the upfront research. That's what we're here to do, but it is a give and take process, as I will give my suggestions based on your needs, but ultimately you will have to aid in the decision.
Sounds like it's actually a really interesting conversation that needs to happen between field solution architects like yourself, as well as all of the customers and the IT teams that they have that are trying to manage and get themselves properly postured for all of the, as you like to say, scary cyber things out there. Listen, I think it's been an excellent hour here, listening and understanding some of your perspective on what a SIEM can actually do, how the implementation of a SIEM for the various aspects of each of our customers' requirements and needs is really very much customizable and needs to be an ongoing and interactive conversation between both the security teams with the customer as well as here at CDW Canada. I think, a lot of recommendations that I have for those that are on the phone and listening in, work through your account managers. We certainly have, a lot of integration and a lot of time to hook you up with the right people to have those discussions, whether it's here directly with Adam as our field solution architect in the security space, or if it is just you've already got a fair idea of what type of SIEM and which partners you want to start working with. We absolutely can carry on those conversations and hook you up in the right way with those partners, with the partner SCs if you need. Work with your AMs. Let's have that conversation and keep it going. And further, I know there's lots of follow-ons too about the cloud and which way should I go, on-prem, off-prem. CDW Canada's cloud services are absolutely there to assist you in that conversation and make sure that you understand what it is that you're really faced with. I want to thank Adam for actually taking us through this discussion on the SIEM, the fact that it really is a set of setup that gives us information out of the slew of data that's out there. And I know we're all overloaded with a set of data and there's too much to really deal with. The SIEM really allows us to organize it, implement it in a tiered fashion so we can actually get proper information out of that. With that, certainly if you continue to have questions, please continue to submit them, reach out to your AMs, and I look forward to hearing more in the rest of the series that we have. 2 down and 8 to go. I look forward to a lot more engaging and interesting security topics from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So I need to.
Not too wordy.
No, great. That was good. So much time back to CW. I love it.
Yoink. I have to admit, after I don't remember who we were interviewing, one of the FSAs, Brian Joseph, is that his name? Yeah, one of the sales managers. We were talking. I was asking questions, all the rest of it. I walked the candidate back to the lobby, and